I always thought school was boring. Classes, teachers, homework, it was the same routine every day. But today was different. Today was the day everything changed. It started like any other morning. I was sitting in history class, staring at the clock, waiting for the bell to ring. That's when the loudspeaker crackled to life. "Attention, staff and students." The principal's voice came through, calm but firm. "We are initiating a lockdown. This is not a drill. Please follow lockdown procedures immediately." At first I thought it was a joke, a prank to shake up our boring day. But then I saw Mrs. Garcia's face. She wasn't scared. She was terrified. She locked the classroom door, turned off the lights, and motioned for us to move to the corner of the room, away from the windows. "Stay quiet," she whispered. "Do not make a sound." I crouched in the corner with my classmates, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was so silent I could hear everyone's breathing. My best friend, Jake, sat next to me. He mouthed, "What's happening?" I just shook my head. I didn't know. That's when we heard the first noise. It was faint but unmistakable. The sound of footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate steps, echoing off the tiles. They weren't in a hurry. Whoever it was, they were taking their time. I glanced at the door. The small window in the middle was covered, but I could see shadows moving outside. The footsteps stopped right outside our room. My breath caught in my throat as the doorknob jiggled. It was locked, thank God, but then something slammed against the door, hard. Once, twice. Mrs. Garcia motioned for us to stay silent, but I could see her hand trembling. Whoever was out there was trying to get in. The banging stopped. For a moment, there was silence. I thought maybe they had given up, but then we heard it. A scraping sound, like metal dragging across the floor. I moved away from our door and down the hallway. The footsteps followed. I thought that would be the end of it, but the nightmare was just beginning. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, careful not to make any noise. It was a text from my mom. I didn't reply. "News says there's someone in the school. Call me." I didn't reply. I couldn't. The sound of my fingers tapping on the screen seemed too loud in the stillness of the room. Another noise broke the silence. A scream. It was distant, somewhere on the other side of the school, but it was enough to send chills down my spine. Whoever was in the hallway wasn't just wandering. They were hunting. Minutes felt like hours. The scream stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. I kept staring at the clock, hoping for the time to speed up, hoping for the police to show up. But the silence didn't last. The footsteps returned, closer this time. They stopped outside our door again. We held our breath as a shadow passed across the window. This time, they didn't try the doorknob. Instead, we heard something. Sniffing. Like they were smelling the air. My heart felt like it would explode out of my chest. Then, a whisper. Low, raspy, and chilling. "I know you're in there." The whole class froze. My eyes darted to Mrs. Garcia, but she just shook her head, tears streaming down her face. Whoever or whatever was out there knew we were inside. The door rattled again, but it held. After what felt like forever, The footsteps moved away. The tension in the room eased, but only slightly. Suddenly there was a crash. Glass shattering. It came from the room next door. We heard screams, desperate and short-lived. Then, silence. I couldn't take it anymore. I whispered to Jake, "We have to get out of here." He looked at me like I was crazy, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He didn't say no. While the others stayed huddled, Jake and I crawled toward the back of the room where a small window was cracked open. I pushed it wider, careful not to make noise. The cold air hit my face as I looked down. It was a drop, but not too far. We could make it. One by one, we climbed out, landing on the grass below. The schoolyard was eerily empty, but the sounds from inside still haunted us. Whispers, screams, and something else, growling. We ran. We didn't stop until we reached the edge of the woods behind the school. From there, we watched as flashing lights finally arrived. The police swarmed the building, guns drawn, but whatever was inside didn't come out. To this day, I don't know what it was. The news called it a tragedy, but they never explained what really happened. The police found bodies, but no suspect, no answers. I don't go to that school anymore. I can't. Every time I pass by, I hear the whispers again. I know you're in there. After that day, I didn't sleep properly for weeks. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those whispers. They crawled into my mind, twisting my dreams into nightmares. Jake and I stopped talking about what happened at school. We didn't even tell the police everything. How could we? What were we supposed to say? That someone or something hunted us like animals. The town moved on quickly. People don't like to think about horrible things for too long. The school stayed closed for months, and when it reopened, they'd repainted the walls, replaced the broken windows, and acted like everything was normal. But it wasn't. I couldn't stay away, though. Something about what happened that day pulled at me. I wanted answers, even if I was terrified of finding them. One night, I convinced Jake to come with me. It was stupid, reckless, but I couldn't do it alone. We snuck out after midnight and biked to the school. The building loomed in the dark, its windows like black eyes staring at us. "You sure about this?" Jake asked, his voice shaky. "No," I admitted, "but I have to know." We climbed over the fence and made our way to the back of the building. The police tape was gone, but I could still see the scratches on the doors and walls, deep, jagged marks like claws had carved them. My stomach turned as I remembered the sounds from that day. We slipped inside through the same window we'd escaped from before. The air was heavy and cold, and every sound we made echoed through the empty halls. The smell was the worst, like old blood and something rotten. As we walked through the corridors, memories flooded back. The banging on the doors, the screams, the shadows moving outside. The legs felt like lead, but I kept going. Something was drawing me deeper. That's when we heard it. A faint sound coming from the direction of the gym. It was soft at first, like a low hum, but it grew louder as we got closer. It wasn't human. It was more like a chanting. What the hell is that? Jake whispered. I "I don't know," I said, but my voice cracked. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but my legs kept moving. We reached the gym doors and the chanting stopped. The sudden silence was worse. My heart pounded in my ears as I pushed the door open. The gym was empty, or at least it looked that way at first. The bleachers were folded back, and the basketball hoops hung lifelessly from the ceiling. But the floor was covered in strange symbols, painted in what looked like dried blood. Circles, lines, symbols I didn't recognize, all leading to the center. In the middle of the floor was a pile of something. Clothes, papers, bits of furniture, all burned into a heap of ash. It smelled foul, like charred flesh and chemicals. My stomach turned, and I had to cover my nose. "Let's get out of here," Jake said, grabbing my arm. But before we could leave, we heard it again, the chanting, only this time it was louder, and it wasn't coming from the speakers or the halls. It was coming from inside the gym. We spun around, and that's when we saw them. Figures, one by one, stepping out of the shadows. They were tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that seemed too long and faces that were ong. Their eyes were empty sockets and their mouths didn't move, but the chanting continued. Jake grabbed my arm. "Run." We bolted for the door, but the chanting grew louder, deafening. The lights flickered, and for a moment, the figures disappeared. When the lights came back, they were closer. We ran faster than we ever had before. Through the halls, down the stairs, out the same window we'd come in. We didn't stop running until we were back on our bikes, pedaling as fast as we could. Even then, I swear I heard whispers in the wind calling after us. We didn't talk about what we saw that night. Not to each other, not to anyone. But I've never been the same. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear the chanting again, faint and distant. And when I look outside, I swear I see shadows that don't belong. Something followed us out of that school. Something that doesn't want to let us go. Revealed a man of foresight. It was a beautiful night, like no other night. Maybe we'd imagined the chanting, the figures, the symbols. Fear does weird things to your brain, right? But deep down, I knew the truth. Jake knew it too. He stopped coming to school entirely. His mom said he was sick, but I saw him around town, pale, quiet, and jumpy, like he was afraid of his own shadow. I started noticing strange things in my own life. At first it was small, a door creaking open when I knew I'd closed it, or my phone buzzing with no notifications. Then it got worse. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to whispers, too faint to understand, but loud enough to make my skin crawl. I'd check my room, the hallway, even outside, but no one was there. The shadows in the corners of my room seemed darker, thicker, as if they were watching me. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my flashlight and decided to face it. If something was haunting me, I needed to know what it wanted. I sat in my room, staring into the corner where the shadows felt alive. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice shaking. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the shadows moved, slowly. They shifted and stretched, forming a shape, tall and thin, with empty sockets where eyes should have been. I froze, my flashlight trembling in my hand. It didn't speak, but I heard it. The chanting was back, inside my head, loud and clear. The words made no sense, but they filled me with dread. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come. The figure raised a hand, long fingers pointing at me. Then it vanished, leaving me gasping for air and drenched in sweat. The next day, desperate, I went back to the school during the day, hoping to find some clue, anything to stop this nightmare. The gym was closed off, but I broke in through the same window Jake and I had escaped from. The symbols on the floor were gone, scrubbed clean, but I noticed something else. Near the burnt pile at the center of the gym, there was a single scrap of paper left behind. It was charred at the edges, but still readable. The words weren't in English or any language I recognized, but as I stared at them, my head started to pound, and I felt that same overwhelming dread I'd felt the night of the lockdown. But I was wrong. A week later, I woke up to find a single word scratched into my bedroom wall. Found.